and welcome back to Beginning Quilting with Maddie. I'm Angelique.
And I'm Maddie.
And today we're getting ready to assemble your quilt. Are you excited?
I'm so excited. I can't wait to see how it all comes together.
Yeah, so I mean, we've been basically doing all the prep work, right? So now we're gonna actually get to do the assembly. So before we get started on that, let's talk about the last block that you put together first, which was
the Sawtooth Star.
The Sawtooth Star. So tell me how the rest of your homework went with that.
Yeah, I felt like it went really well. I think a lot of my points ended up lining up. I mean, not all of them are perfect, obviously, but I feel like on the ones where it didn't line up, I felt like I understood why and what I had done wrong. So I'm feeling pretty good about it.
Yeah, I'm gonna tell, I mean, I caught a little bit there, but I'm looking, right? Because, I don't know.
Because you've been quilting for a long time.
Yeah, well, I'm looking because we're discussing it, really. Yeah. But normally I wouldn't look that closely. But I'm gonna say, overall, considering this is your first quilt ever, and the difference in the difficulty of the blocks and all that, I think you did a tremendously wonderful job.
Oh, thank you.
I think you should be proud of what you've accomplished, and that, having a little error, that's fine.
Yeah.
It was your first quilt,
yeah.
And you've got to give yourself a little leeway on that. But you learned, and now you know for your next one, because you're going to be a lifer.
Of course.
And if not, I'm going to keep bugging you until you are. But definitely, you'll know. For the next one where to be a little bit more careful, and all you can do is get better.
Yeah,
you can't get worse.
Exactly.
So that was your last one, and now let's just kind of take a look at everything that you've made so far as just a refresher. So we just looked at all of our Sawtooth Stars, and I'm just gonna stack these over here. And so let's just kind of have you go through these, and I'm just trying to get to all the same ones. And let's just kind of refresh our colors, right? So we made a couple of the ones with the orange for the old windmill.
That's right.
Or three. We're a little out of order. And we made a couple with the green. So this was our pop of color.
Yep.
And I'll stack those, over here. And then we also made the first one, the broken dish. So this is where we started with a couple of the initial, like the beiges and the greens, to kind of get started with that. So those are the three different blocks that are going to make up our pattern, right? And then we did some pre-cuts of your blocks that are going in between. And so this is sort of that beige garden flower thing that we have. Now these are very directional, right? So we need to kind of think about that when we're doing our layout. If this is going to be a concern for you, I think for a layout like this, it's going to be very easy to make sure we keep them directional, and I would want to do that. But there's nothing wrong with saying maybe you have them flip around because you want to create that movement. So it's really kind of up to you, because then maybe you have one that's upside down and so on, right? And we're going to want to do some pressing of these before we actually sew them together, just to get those seams out. And so we'll make sure we check that. And also, it's a good idea to do that before the cutting as well, because we do need to make sure that our sizes are correct. So that accuracy is going to be really, really important as we're creating our rows. Because when we sew those rows together, and if we have that difference,
multiple sizes,
right? So we're definitely going to go do some pressing of that before we actually check the sizes. So I'm just going to set those to the side. That'll be just an easy kind of off-camera thing that we do. And then I did want to just go through all of the sizes of these blocks, right? Because these are, this is easier to cut down than this is. And so I want to make sure that we're as close as possible to those 12.5s. And I know that, for some of these, when we checked them, they were pretty good. So I'm going to have you take kind of, one of each to get started, and just check your sizing and see, do we have anything that seems too small.
Yeah. This one seems pretty good, but I'm not shocked because I feel like you did this color, so I feel like we should check those
let's
ones.
do these, my bad.
Okay.
So we do find where it's sticking out a little bit, we can do some micro cuts.
Yeah.
Just to kind of straighten out those edges a little bit.
Yeah,
So
this
I
one's
think
got
like
a little bit of overhang.
Yeah, so feel free to grab.
The comfort cutter
Yeah.
here.
And a lot of this, you know, we're just kind of demonstrating, so we'll do a lot of this off camera, so you guys don't have to sit here and be bored
Yes.
watching us
Do
trim
little
things.
trimming.
But I did want to kind of go over it a little bit for you and for the audience, you know, that there are some things that you can do to try to get everything to line up. If you do, you know, because I did that block of the month, and there was a new technique that they were having us do to make a Lemoyne star. And everyone had trouble getting the final block size to be what it was supposed to be. There was just something about the extra stitch lines that was creating a little bit of issue trying to get it that final size.
Right.
And so what I'll do sometimes, if everything's gonna be the same size block and it's not gonna distort, you know, when it gets sewn together, those points and stuff, I can do little micro cuts of all the rest of them to meet the size of whatever the smallest one is. And that's if it's, you know, maybe an 1/8 off or something. If it's a 1/4 off, forget it. We're just gonna have to redo it unless we don't have the material, and in which case we just kind of have to live with that.
Right.
Like I said, it's always easier to cut than it is to add, but there's been times when I was like, I don't understand how I got off this much, and I've had to add some strips, and we just call that a design element that we didn't plan for in advance, because there was no way to repair it. I didn't have any more fabric.
It's like Bob Ross. They're
Exactly, happy little trees, exactly, exactly. So that's something that you can do. If it's less than 1/8 of an inch and you're comfortable, I think for you, probably trimming to make sure they're straight, since this is your first one, will be easier. For me, I'm a lazier quilter. If I think I can fix it in my seam allowance, because I feel like I have that control, then I'll just fix it in my seam allowance. As long as it's less than, you know, around 1/8 or less than 1/8, I can kind of wiggle that room, but you start getting to the 1/4 inch and forget it. And that's because you don't want to end up with, you know, an 1/8 of an inch seam for most things. I mean, there's a few patterns definitely because you're folding it out. You do, because that way you get less bulk for, you know, the final look, like with the Dresden plate or something like that. But for the most part, if you don't have a good 1/4 of an inch seam and you haven't pre-washed, when you throw it in the washer, it's going to shrink and you're going to pop your seams. And I can show you on a quilt that I did that, one of my first quilts. So trying to get it all to line up. So that's why, you know, we want to do that. So go ahead and trim that up, and then we will, you know, double check everything. We'll get these ironed, we'll check those sizes, and then we'll get to laying out, okay?
All right, sounds good.
All right, so we have checked all the sizes of your blocks. We've done any micro cutting that we needed to do. We're ready to start assembly. And one of the easiest ways to start laying stuff out so that you can assemble it is to, like, you could use a floor, you could use a big table. I don't love being on the floor, so I like a design wall. Okay. So we have this design wall here. It's made out of felt to help things stick, but it is a little movie since it's not like up against a wall. And so I also like to pin stuff. So let's take a look at the diagram, and we'll share that with you so you can remember what the final quilt's supposed to look in the wall. And then we can start picking our different blocks and getting them all added to the board here so we know what it's going to look like.
All right, let's do it.
Come on over. All right, so this is your layout. Now what we have to do is we have to take this to the machine to sew it. And this is where you kind of having some way to organize them so you can take off an entire row, or, you know, if you're doing this like with your quilt guild or something like that and you're borrowing their design wall, you can label. And so there are a couple different ways that we can do that. We can label with an erasable pen, which is one of my favorite methods of doing that. I just mark on the bottom, and I do just a pretty straight grid pattern. So maybe I have rows A, B, C, D, E, F, and then columns 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right?
Yeah.
And I can just label that with the thing, and especially if I have a lot of them. There's also, you could print out these letters and numbers. I've had, in a block of the month, they did it on freezer paper, which you can kind of temporary iron on. I never really tried that. And then they do sell these. A lot of the local, or a lot of quilt shops will have these, but they're letters and numbers.
Okay.
And so you can use these as well. And so there's only a set of letters and numbers. There's not duplicates. So if I was going to use something like this, then I might just do A, B, C, D, E, F, G, that kind of thing. But these don't really stick. So that's where I just throw them on the ground. That's where I just clip them on.
Okay.
Yeah. So, and then I'm going to need those clips anyway.
Yeah.
So that's kind of a couple of the ways that you can do it. Up to you, but just some way of keeping them organized.
All right.
All right. So find your letters and we'll just clip them on and then we can take them off.
Let's do it.
So we finished your layout and we finished organizing it with the letters. So now what we're going to do is we're going to take the first row off and get to sewing. And I find the best way to do that is to stack them in order. So since this is the top row, I'm a shorty, go ahead and start by taking off A.
Okay.
And then put it on top of B. And then B would go on top of C and so on. And that way you can keep them in order and keep them in the same, up. Don't turn anything, whatever the word is I'm looking for. That's the word. All right, so you have them in order. We're now going to go over to the sewing machine and talk about sewing them. Okay, so we have your stack here. They're labeled. We're going to start with A and B. Okay. And we put them in the orientation that they were, okay? And so this is really easy because all you're doing is sewing along the edges here. So we can flip.
Right sides together.
Right sides together. And if it helps, this maybe we're just kind of have a little pen, maybe mark a little B on the back of that one. So since these don't stick.
Right.
That way you don't mix them up when you do some chain stitching.
Okay.
So we'll just orient these. So basically, the typical.
1/4 inch seam allowance.
And I'll get you some more of these so that you have them.
Okay.
And then, watch your 1/4 inch seam allowance. Watch if you do decide to sew from this side, that's why it's a good idea to go ahead and mark one.
Yeah.
That way you can keep, since this is the side that has your seams, it might be easier to sew on this side than the other side to keep them straight.
Yeah.
And you're just going to sew them together and do the same thing. You can sew the next two together. And then, cut, and then you would sew C to B, which you labeled. So as I said, I would just do little markings as you go.
Okay.
Because, it's kind of hard to do that on the design board. And then your A through E, right? And once you get done, you'll just put it right back up there with the pins and move on to the next one.
Sweet.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we're going to sew. I'm going to help you out. And when we both get done, we will have rows completed. Sound good? All right. Okay, so we have finished sewing all of the blocks together to make the rows. Let's take a look at your layout and make sure that we put everything back first.
Okay. So far, so good.
Right, that's just, it's always a good idea to double check. And it's also a good idea because I did this, I got everything assembled, quilted and bound before I caught a mistake in one of my blogs.
Oh no.
So make sure you just take a really good look at everything, because if there's anything that needs to change, if it's an orientation, we can still do that pretty easily here.
Yeah.
But I think it's matching.
Yeah.
Right, so the next thing is going to be putting the rows together. So we're going to start by taking the top row off and we're going to go press it.
Okay.
So
let's do it.
I'll let you do it because, again, can't reach it.
I got you.
And keep it in the same orientation, right? So that we remember what goes where. And again, this might be where we double check our pattern again. So let's go ahead to the ironing board.
Okay.
And we're gonna flip it because we're gonna iron.
Okay. Like this?
Yeah. So it really doesn't matter which direction you want to iron, as long as this first row, it's the second row it's going to matter. Okay. All right, so I think the easiest thing to do is to go ahead and press these all one direction. Okay. So I'm going to start over here with block A. All right, so we can flip that over.
Okay.
So we have A back on this side. And if you will, go ahead and grab row B.
Okay.
And again, keep that orientation when you bring it over. So we're gonna line this up and we're gonna flip the right sides together.
Okay.
And now we're just going to finger press each of those so we get that nesting seam like we did before when we were making some of these, okay? And just clip that.
So would this one go that way?
Yeah, it's gonna go opposite of what it is.
Okay.
You may have to pull a little bit because again, we wanna get it nice and nested.
Yeah.
Okay, all right, so I just wanted to show you kind of how I cheat here.
Yeah, thank you.
So because I got this nice and lined up and it's nice and smooth and it's, you know, pretty close to the corner there, I'm pretty confident that instead of pre-cutting, since we forgot, I can actually just line up my quarter here and maintain my 1/4 of an inch seam allowance on this part.
Oh, okay.
And then I can just cut off the
Yeah,
excess. So that's a little cheat that I'll do if I miss cutting something. Sorry.
That's all right.
And then I want to be sure that I'm maintaining this as I'm, so sometimes you got to give it a little tug. Then as I get closer, obviously I can't keep that on here. Again, I want to. Okay, so I'm just gonna kind of use that, right? And then I just kind of use this to help me keep it aligned as I go. And the rest of them are lined up, so you should be good to go.
Awesome.
Okay.
Thank you.
The important thing is that every row that you sew on, to nest it, you're just gonna have it the opposite row.
Yeah.
So I like to, when it's a design like this where it's just row after row after row, I like to do one row at a time. Then the next one and the next one, finger press in between to get the nesting and then actually press to get it back into in final position. So we're gonna start, so you can see we're gonna start by just pressing down those seams from when we sewed the blocks in the direction of the nesting that we did.
Okay.
Oops, wrong way.
Should that one go that way?
See how it nested there?
Oh.
Yeah, I'll show it here in a second. I'm just running out of. Yeah, so I think when you were at the machine, and it's fine because it's it's still nested. I think you ended up kind of torquing them the other way, but you got to be a little bit more careful with the next row, or we're going to get a lump when it does that. So for the first one, fine, it'll be fine. But that's why we press that way, because as you can see.
Okay.
Yeah. Same thing with this one, and I think we're also flipped from where we had it originally on here.
Okay.
Okay, the next thing that we're going to need to do is iron this seam.
Okay.
Okay. So either direction doesn't matter. You could split the seam open. I don't think you're going to have major issues with bulk.
Okay.
And like I said, I think I've mentioned before that can weaken the seam. So let's just pick a side and press it over, okay?
Okay.
And there's usually kind of like a way it wants to go.
Yeah.
Right? So I'm just going to do that. So this is, we're pressing the seam that you just sewed.
Right.
Go ahead and pull me that way so I can. Perfect, thank you. We'll come this way with it. We could trim that off if we wanted to, which we can do later.
Okay.
Because that's the one that was a little
Extra long.
Yeah, somehow or another we missed that when we were going through all of the, we had a lot of blocks to look at, so we probably,
Yes.
And then like all pressing, do it on the other side as well.
Okay.
Now this is where you gotta be careful because our labels are gonna start to disappear depending on where we wrote them down. So I just caught the B was over here, so I wanna remember this is A, B, C.
Yeah.
So I'm basically just giving those corners a nice good press, pulling like we have to.
Yeah.
I feel like the ironing board's never big enough for my project. Okay, so now we're ready to attach the third row.
Okay.
So remember that was A, and this is sometimes if you need to put it back up, like we'll just carry it over here, unscripted. All right, so if you'll hold this side up for me,
Yeah.
we can just double check we didn't twist it around.
Looks right to me.
Okay, so let's get it back on the ironing board.
Okay.
And so at this point, Maddie's just gonna keep adding each piece on each row, pressing the nested seams, pressing the seam she's creating until we get all of the rows on. And we're gonna do them in order, A, B, C, D, all the way, or 1, 2, 3, all the way to the bottom, okay?
Yeah. Let's
So,
do it.
Let's do it. Maddie, you finished it.
Yeah, we're all done.
Ready? You've done all the ironing. You ready to reveal it?
Let's check it out.
Okay. Dun, da, da, da. Ta-da!
Hooray! So cute.
It's gorgeous.
Oh, I love how it
love
came
it.
out.
And you did really well for the most part, lining up those corners now and again. But I mean, you'd really have to be looking at it.
Yeah.
For your first quilt, I think you did a tremendous job.
Oh, thank you. And thank you for all your help.
Oh, absolutely. Are you ready to think about like the next steps of our project?
Yeah, what's up next?
So next time we are going to talk to Maddie about the batting options that she has, the backing that you want to put on your quilts. We're going to talk about making a quilt sandwich, when you really need to baste, and types of basting that you need to do. And then I'm going to show you how to load your quilt on the Evolution hoop frame that gives you the best of both worlds. You get both a rolling frame and you get a hoop frame. So I
Sounds
thought
like
it's
a
a
good
good
thing.
start for you, kind of thinking about your space, and it'll give you room to grow. So
Yeah,
that's
awesome.
the next thing that we're going to be covering. In the meantime, if you look in the comments below, you're going to see a link to the full pattern this time, from everything from making the blocks all the way through the assembly portion that we did today. And if you do have any questions about the project, please, again, you can put those in the comments as well. And then lastly, you know, if you like this, please subscribe to our channel. And if you've been sewing along, share your final pieced quilt in the comments as well. So until next time, please sew with love and grace.